we became maniacs, before we really did it, what led to the Apes uprising? That's basically the story, of course, of Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, and then subsequently a reboot that was done in 2011 with Rise of the Planet of the Apes. I'm John Chang with Dan Edmonds.
Hello, hello.
And something that we kind of covered a little bit, but I feel like is definitely relevant to this series, where sci-fi at different times we somehow end up rooting for the quote unquote villains or the enemy, so to speak, and everything, and then the humans really end up looking like the bad guys and stuff. So I was just kind of wondering, like, what is it about sometimes that sci-fi seems to be able to kind of really do that more than other genres?
Yeah, well, I mean, sci-fi is always like this, as Rod Serling did in the Twilight Zone a lot of times, is they're used as a thought experiment to sort of just hold a mirror up to what we're like in our natures or predominant thought at that particular time that something's made. And for me, it's the most interesting sci-fi is ones where the humans sort of seem like the bad guys. You can say like Battlestar Galactica would be another one where it's often very, like the more recent TV series anyway, is one where you're kind of rooting for the robots a lot of the time. And I think what's clever about it is that we often kind of stereotype or characterize particular types of people in a way not only to sometimes dehumanize them or humiliate them or something like that, but it's really also to bolster our own identity. That's what real stereotyping is. And I think in a way sci-fi tries to put that on its head by sort of twisting that around and just saying, well, okay, this is who you think you are, but this is the reality of what that particular mindset of how you identify as a human or this particular group of people can be in certain situations.
Yeah, and I feel like it's similar to this quote about photography, where a really good photographer isn't about simply like taking a beautiful shot or anything, but it's like they create a way for us to see the world through their lens and stuff. And I feel like sci-fi seems to somehow, they're able to kind of do that like we're able to see another perspective in ways that like other times we don't with other genres and everything. So and so of course this is a great segue into the first one with Conquest. Roddy McDowall is now back, this time as Caesar, and we start off with him and Armando, played by
Ricardo Montalban.
Yeah, aka Mr. Rourke and stuff. It's, I think, one of his early roles after his Space Seed and kind of playing Khan in the original series of Star Trek. And it's funny how like he's so distinctive though. Like now, like never mind Fantasy Island stuff. It's really hard to not see him as like kind of like just his mannerism, his voice and stuff like that. But at the same time though, it fits into this role that he's this animal circus trainer stuff, and we're right away pretty sympathetic to the fact that like he's been protecting the Caesar, who's the son of the
Zira and Cornelius.
Cornelius, yes.
And to have a bit more backstory for our viewers, they, of course, what's happened was beneath the Planet of the Apes, the rogue humans decided to destroy the planet, and Cornelius and Zira escape from the Planet of the Apes back in time to the 70s and give birth to a son, which is Caesar.
Right.
But the upshot of this is that people learn that in the future, humans are basically slaves to an ape-controlling dominant ape population. So the backlash is now we find ourselves in 1991, where humans have realized that, we need to somehow suppress the evolution of apes to ensure they don't take over the world. So there we go. That's to catch everyone up with where we are in the Apes saga at this point.
But of course, the irony is that like there's some kind of virus that killed off all our pets and everything like that. It's funny that they had this monument to Fido, and kind of, that's one of those kind of ironic things that they have in it. And and then the apes start off being our replacement pets, but then next thing you know, we realize, oh, gee, we can make them servants. So then now, like, despite our knowledge of like this foreshadowed, future and stuff like that, now apes are not only, like in zoos and stuff like that, but they're in all our homes,
Yeah, and that's kind of the background of this very fascist kind of society that humans have fashioned for themselves in this faux 1991, where these very kind of beaten down, oppressed apes are given terrible menial jobs and sent to reconditioning centers where they're trained to pour glasses and things like this. And
right.
It's if ever you wanted an on the nose sort of colonial anti-slavery sort of message, it's pretty slap bang in your face there in the start of this one.
Yeah, they really went deep into the fascist kind of motif where besides like kind of the black uniforms of the police and stuff, they also like kind of the architecture is really reminiscent of like kind of the Bauhaus kind of thing where they it's glass and concrete and steel and stuff. We're like very like cold, I guess, and stuff like that. And as you and I were talking offline stuff, that they use two locations primarily. One is Century City, which is by the current Fox studio, and then the other one was UC Irvine. And just like what I was kind of alluding to earlier was that like Irvine, I've had so this is not on me. This is like what friends have called it, that they call it elitist Irvine and stuff. So it's kind of like I'm guessing that like there's this funny also connection that there were times that like between architecture and the people it attracts, that somehow like it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, I guess, is another thing that kind of seems to happen.
Yeah. No, it's very claustrophobic, very kind of industrial. And of course, that does also coincide with studio policies at that time, which was if you were making a sequel, you'd kind of cut the budget in half because you'd already you wouldn't need to spend as much because you've already done the hard work establishing the franchise.
Right.
So yeah, and it's got there's lots of sort of dehumanizing stuff being done to the apes, which sounds ridiculous if you're talking about apes, but of course that's the subtext, although not very subtle in this one. No. The fact that they're sort of pets, and then they're being auctioned off, and they're described as, oh, let's find some good breeding stock for future menial slave apes. And this kind of goes back to this kind of, there's this really weird scene where you obviously, predominantly this movie is people in monkey masks, and there's this weird bit where they've taken Caesar off because they think he might be able to sort of breed and make some better apes, but there's actually real chimpanzees in the room. Was that and that was a really weird thing because right up to that point there's this kind of it's almost like a suspension of disbelief in that all apes are kind of look like people in masks up to this point. You just have to kind of accept it. But then throwing the real sort of images of the chimpanzees really kind of throws you out of the movie for a bit, and you're just like what? So the guy in the mask is going to have sex with the real chimp? It just throws that really sort of weird contradiction about the whole movie, and that
definitely.
But that's this whole thing again, and this is the idea of like the women just being seen as wombs for breeding, which is again a very kind of hark back to slavery, really.
Right. Yeah, I mean, they really played up. That's the other thing they played up was the slavery aspects, because like this time around they actually have like this auction happening and stuff. We did kind of see that with the Tim Burton version, but I feel like that one, or this is one, really kind of heightens that metaphor and stuff like that. And then the ape control was like an interesting aspect about it. Like I guess there's so many apes, which again, like that like if you knew that there's this danger of a future with apes taking over stuff, like I guess on the one hand you apparently need the apes for like kind of everything from restaurants to to the home, to like delivery service and stuff like that. That then you need an ape control, like kind of almost like air traffic control, I guess, or something, and to basically keep track of them and to kind of bag and tag them and stuff.
Well, the funny thing about this makes me think actually of AI and automation, because it seemed like in the movie there were just as many people controlling the apes as there were apes doing the jobs, and it seemed like it wasn't a very efficient way of doing this. And there were already people protesting, real human waiters outside going, "Come on, jobs for humans." And I just thought, oh, this is a kind of maybe a almost anti-industrialization kind of message anyway. But I would say that has been my experience so far with a lot of AI and automation. It seems to take twice as many people to do the work of one human a lot of the time. But anyway, yeah, that was a bit strange. But yeah, I mean, I think it's obviously a very kind of, I guess, Marxist view of how power works, because there's at no point any kind of 60s style, we can all just get on harmoniously. It's like they were going to have dominant fascist humans, or we're going to have rebellious apes uprising and taking power. There's no kind of compromise or middle ground, it seems, in this movie. They pretty much have a very bleak view of society, I would say. And
there's a weird thing that like is paralleled in real life and stuff like that, where it seems like certainly we're seeing a little bit that during COVID-19 and everything, where during times of fear, the fascist kind of powers seem to just are able to kind of gather more more of a base for like kind of controlling things and everything. That's a little bit kind of V for Vendetta kind of really alludes to that. We see that, of course, with even though that 1984 is in theory about a communist kind of totalitarian setup, but really what they cover though is like, again, a very kind of fascist kind of very much about control, and that everything's kind of I don't know, that's where fascism and socialism really meet in the middle, so to speak. It's like when it's about like kind of like this control being all managed by like the central body, right, and stuff.
Yeah, all encompassing centralized control with no way of people ever really changing it properly or having a say in it is the ultimate expression of both of them, really. So yeah, I think also going back what you said earlier about how we sometimes identify with the wrong people, so to speak. What was clever about the original Planet of the Apes was this idea that we're supposed to identify with these humans and realize that they're now no longer the dominant species, which is a very sort of clever twist. And in this one, again, we have this thing of you're supposed to maybe identify with the humans, but they turn out to be completely oppressive fascists, and you actually end up feeling sorry for and hoping that the apes win by the end of it. So I kind of feel like, along with the first one, this was probably one of the more political of the Apes movies, or probably the most political. I mean, speaking of which, the final scenes really where we have them uprising is, I mean, even by the writer himself, I think he said it basically it's supposed to evoke the Watts riots.
I was going to say
South Central. That's which, from what I understand, was sort of basically a result of low income being excluded out of lots of housing and good schooling opportunities, and after a sort of a police incident, doesn't that sound familiar? So people just got fed up and decided to take the power into their own hands.
Yeah, I mean, I watched this documentary that was on C-SPAN about the Watts riots, and all you said was pretty much what they basically covered. That like it's a problem that was pretty much like many steps back. Like, in other words, what we saw was the Watts riots. And so sometimes we look at that and go, oh, it's like kind of this police kind of being abusive to this the people and stuff like that, and spark things off. But it's almost always like this underlying something else that's been going on for quite a long time, that was just kind of simmering and just waiting for the right moment to kind of, blow up and stuff. And it's yeah, I mean, and then of course, like right now, like you said, also that like we're seeing it, in the middle of a pandemic and stuff, right? With the Black Lives Matter kind of thing. That it's I mean, these are just things that like just been just seething at the surface, and next thing you know, you have a massive kind of blow up of the forces, kind of what's that saying about the unstoppable force with an immovable object and stuff. So,
yeah, right. Yeah, and I think that's very much at the end of this, you get this similar sort of message that they're saying, it's MacDonald who, being an African American, is sort of there as this sort of mediating force, talking to Caesar, but he says, can't we just do this peacefully? We can't just kind of keep going on this sort of violent rampage. And he basically rebuffs by saying, and I can't really quote it directly, but basically he says, until, we have some power, or unless we take the power into our own hands, then we have no stake at the table. You have to have power to have freedom, is basically what he recounts it as. And an interesting side note to this is that the original release then had a second speech afterwards that was kind of just much more kind of, but, we've uprisen and we've rebelled, but now we're going to just go away and we're all going to think about it, and hopefully we can all kind of, come together. But because the original one didn't test with audiences, surprise, surprise. But the one I watched, actually, they cut all that out and they just kept it to the original kind of director's cut, which was much more effective, actually, I thought. And it's much bleaker. And it really is, you come away with this idea that there is just going to be this kind of loop of them rebelling, people trying to grasp hold of control again, the humans, trying to get back in control. And it is a much more realistic sort of cycle of this power struggle, which, if, anything is in real life is to go by, we've seen the same thing, really, between Rodney King and the What's Riots of the 60s, now Black Lives Matter. These things just keep coming in a very cyclical nature. So,
and I think that's why MacDonald is such an interesting character, because he really represents like the Martin Luther King kind of voice of like hey, let's kind of resolve things more peaceably and stuff. And meanwhile, like kind of on the one hand, he has a governor who basically like kind of like he says brightness was never encouraged among the slaves, like MacDonald saying this. And then, the governor's like, oh, don't be touchy and stuff. So you can kind of absolutely see that different times that, like, somebody who's trying to, like, kind of say, hey, we got to kind of, respond to this because it's this isn't acceptable and stuff like that. And then, like, kind of the powers that be basically kind of saying, oh, kind of it's nothing, just ignore it stuff. And then meanwhile, like, you had the Caesars, right, the more radical voices saying, like kind of you all people should understand and stuff. And so he's constantly kind of pulled by, like kind of these two directions, right? And two different, forces.
I think what's really interesting about this movie as well, particularly between Caesar and MacDonald, is that it's written in a way, or maybe it's just the result of my experience of watching it, but you don't feel like MacDonald is at any point like the person you're supposed to be paying attention to, or the person you're rooting for. Ultimately, ultimately, when you're watching it, you're rooting for the radical Caesar to rebel and actually correct the injustice that's being sort of meted out on the other apes. So it's very interesting for me that they didn't try and write MacDonald more as a kind of a heroic figure. He's just literally a kind of a mediating force, and they don't go any further with his character. So they're definitely not trying to appeal to any kind of reasonable approach to, well, I say reasonable, but, any kind of middle ground approach. It's definitely in order to correct big sort of social power inequalities, you need to have some sort of radical rebellion in order to make the point. which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, that is kind of really ironic, and yeah, that like in a way, you know, like kind of if you didn't know any better, right? It's almost like supporting like kind of the whole Black Panther movement and stuff, and yeah, and I think part of all that too is simply, you know, going back to Armando and everything, where he's trying to protect Caesar, and they basically lock him up like a typical fascist state would and stuff, where he's basically, you know, like kind of, you know, similar to after 9/11, where there are a lot of people who just were locked up just simply because like they were suspicious or, you know, just for whatever reason and stuff like that. And once that like, you know, the lack of due process, and then he's basically, you know, like, even though that like he kills himself, you still feel like kind of the authorities were the ones responsible and stuff, because they kind of basically boxed him in, they tortured him and stuff. And, you know, at that point when, you know, Caesar's like kind of really, you know, just heartbroken and stuff, that's like kind of, you know, like it's where we it really flips the switch where we're like kind of, you know, like there's no way we're rooting for the humans to kind of, you know, to make it through this and stuff. And then it's almost like, I think that also makes it where, you know, the whole line from, you know, Charlton Heston, right? You did it, you maniacs, you know, like kind of like, it's pretty much we did it to ourselves, and whatever else happens with Caesar.
Yeah, and another interesting change from the director's cut is that Governor Breck, the leading human, gets they don't show him being beaten to death by the apes at the end, which I thought was a really interesting omission. That was obviously again just too troubling for people in 1972, I guess. But I mean, also symbolically, I think it's very interesting that you've got Caesar being the only one who can speak. So it's almost like this idea that the fascist regime is trying to suppress the voice of these downtrodden people, and so it's kind of has that kind of element as well, that if the word and the voice can be spread and people can understand each other and collectively sort of uprise, that's the real danger here. So interesting stuff.
Although like I don't know about the version you saw, but the one I saw where it had the female ape at the last second say no, though, like kind of like somehow she kind of was able to speak, and that was kind of weird, like kind of
so it's a weird inconsistency, I guess. I'm not really sure, maybe I missed that, but I think in a way that's even more kind of disturbing in a way, because it almost implies that the others are all so suppressed that they dare not speak, you know, which is almost getting into George Orwell 1984, where the thought police might come and sort of get you.
Right.
So it's hard to know if what actually drove that decision to have it right at the end of the movie.
Yeah. And it's funny how, like, for most of the movie, right, like Caesar doesn't say anything except what he you know, slips and stuff, and then that was like kind of the basically how the whole process started of trying to hunt him down and stuff, because he's like, you know, because like you said, the authorities realized that, like, oh, we can't risk, you know, kind of, you know, an ape uprising and stuff, and then, you know, so I guess it's like kind of the circular kind of thing where, you know, because they are so you know, determined to find this last remaining, you know, talking ape and stuff like that then they do all these brutal things and stuff. And then because they do all these brutal things, including leading to the death of Armando, that leads to like kind of, you know, the uprising and everything. So it's, I mean, it almost makes you wonder if like then, if we're also saying then that, like, you know, because of this kind of circularity of things, that, like, you know, things are inevitable, like, you know.
I think that's the message of the movie, really, is that there is like these sort of inevitable sort of power struggles. It's a pretty bleak outlook. I mean, it's by far the bleakest of the Apes movies, I think. But and then definitely, like Escape is more kind of, I think, you know, more about immigration, really, in that you've got two people out of their place in modern society. But this is definitely a very bleak kind of outlook.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Yeah, it's I suppose really it's what, you know, that obviously goes on to Battle of the Planet of the Apes, which is a big war. So there we go.
I did want to mention though, like one kind of interesting anachronism, right, was how this is 1991 in the movie, and they're still using punch cards. So I thought it was an interesting kind of little anachronism.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of stuff going on. It's you have to, I guess. This is a alternate dimension, 1991, where humans are on the decline, and the incoming threat of apes taking over society is stifled technology, perhaps, or something like this, to the point where they've got LED lights on their computers and they're using punch cards and stuff. So yeah.
All very Westworld like.
Well, you know what though, that could have been more intentional, because of course IBM was always their legacy is that they were the punch card makers for the Nazi regime in the concentration camps.
That's true. Yeah.
So that may be another link there that they're trying to
imply, I guess.
Yeah. Watson doesn't have much to say about that. I don't know. Ask him about.
And then the other kind of the one Easter egg, I guess, and stuff was kind of that the line that gives Caesar away is "lousy human bastard," right? And kind of like it mirrors Charlton Heston.
Yeah, very true. Yeah. It's they always try and include that line in one of them, don't they? I mean, I think we've watched enough of the Apes movies now to see it sort of crop up time and time again. But yeah. So is this a good segue to go into the sort of remake or the sort of reboot of Rise of the
apparently
Planet of the Apes?
the creators like to consider this a reboot and stuff. And I think there's something to that in the respect that I feel like besides what we're going to get more into about the technology now being really making a huge difference in storytelling, is that also they kind of took things a different direction in many respects, because here we have genetic engineering being the source of the thing that's kind of sparking the things that kind of happen from here. James Franco is this well-intentioned but flawed hero that is looking for a cure to Alzheimer's, but because how between corporate greed and all that kind of stuff, we see that he ends up creating this virus that not only does have a temporary effect of kind of helping humans, but then it has a permanent effect of kind of really boosting the ape intelligence, and then meanwhile, ultimately, major spoiler, it leads to kind of human deaths and stuff.
Yeah, which is an interesting similarity in that there's a virus involved. I mean, there's quite a few actually between this and Conquest. We've got a main protagonist named Caesar.
Right.
We've got a virus that rather than wiping out dogs and cats, wipes out humans.
Yeah.
In this one, we've got also a kind of an adoptive father figure as well. In that sort of Armando is kind of Caesar's dad, more or less, in Conquest, and this one, although it's much more kind of familial, I would say, in this remake, in that, and and there's this sort of I think what's clever about this remake actually is this idea that being intelligent in a form that's not used to being able to interact with society is a really interesting sort of place to put Caesar in. That there's one point where he's saying, what am I, to James Franco's character. It's so he has that sort of self-consciousness, but there's this sort of real loneliness that's portrayed in his character, in that he's only sort of the only intelligent kind of creature of his kind, which is very effective, I thought.
And it's interesting how it's not about speech this time. It's not until the very end and stuff like that. They use sign language, and the version I watched, for whatever reason, they didn't have the captioning for the sign language.
Mine neither. I was kind of guessing away. I've seen it before, so I kind of knew roughly what was going on.
Right. But I thought that using that was a really effective technique to kind of still have this communication that was between James Franco's character and Caesar, and then ultimately it's like kind of, you know, becomes this language for the apes as well, which like kind of that really like kind of amplifies like kind of I don't know, like kind of this thing of where like the virus, you know, language becomes something that's kind of spread and really like, you know, kind of not only matures them, but like kind of makes them like kind of, you know, develop, I guess, in a way, in a very viral way, I guess.
Yeah, there's a few sort of interesting points about intelligence in this movie, and that one of the things I've noticed both about this and Conquest was that when Caesar in Conquest is put into one of the sort of ape internment camps, they seem to recognize there's something different about him, because they all kind of stand around and stare at him. I don't know if it's that. Maybe they're not. Maybe it's just the way that scene's directed. But in the remake, there is this thing of all the other apes going absolutely crazy because they can tell there is just, you know, body language or other cues that tell them this is, you know, he's not one of us. He's definitely different on some level, which I thought was a really interesting thing to include. And it's this idea that, you know, okay, so the intelligence of the other apes does get better, but he's already, by kind of communicating with them in an intelligent way and recognizing that he needs to kind of make them all work together, he's kind of making them more intelligent in the process, regardless of even before they administered all these drugs from the lab, which I thought was a really interesting kind of point about communication and intelligence in general, really. Yeah.
And it kind of gets into this thing of also like where, you know, we've kind of talked about it in other times, that the mark of, you know, kind of, you know, humanity's superiority in theory was like kind of his intelligence and stuff. And here we have like, you know, these apes that like not only kind of, you know, are parallel, but then, you know, they start kind of exceeding, you know, the human intelligence and you know, just simply like where Caesar like kind of, you know, like basically, I mean, just the stuff that like, you know, some of the stuff you see him figuring out is like kind of just phenomenal. Like, you know, like where, I mean, even your average person, right, to come up with like kind of these schemes to kind of, you know, organize and to like, you know, like break out of the prison and stuff like that. It's like kind of, you know, that's like not your, I mean, your average person probably would have a hard time like kind of achieving, you know, some of the stuff that he's able to do.
Yeah, totally. No, I mean, well, I mean, it's implied that he's considerably more intelligent than most people, I guess.
Right.
But yeah, it was kind of an ape jailbreak was kind of fun. Yeah, I mean, I think the main difference though is this is very much a de-racialized Planet of the Apes movie, in that, you know, you don't have like a slave population of apes that are being downtrodden and oppressed. This is just sort of, you know, they uprise through basically a genetic accident rather than anything. And then it's not like the humans are there to purposefully kind of keep them in their place. It's really just they see it as a sort of a wild animal outbreak rather than, you know, the end of civilization as it's portrayed in Conquest. So yeah, I mean, there's some similarities, some differences. So yeah.
I mean, I think that's where it's an interesting split, right? And definitely why, like, you know, the argument for more it's a reboot, in that, you know, they kind of just get away from the racial, you know, message and stuff. And some might argue that that's kind of like, you know, taking away from the original series and stuff. I think for me, like, what makes it stronger though, as a, you know, whole other franchise and stuff, is the fact that, like, you know, we're gonna get into kind of how Andy Serkis, right, brings to the whole motion capture field this kind of combination of like a real person acting and the technology, that when we see Caesar, like it just, you know, he's able to convey this kind of heart and this emotion, and you know, I watched some interviews of like kind of the other actors even talking about interacting with Andy Serkis, and how it's absolutely like not the same as like kind of, you know, different times where they're with other motion capture before this, they kind of have to talk to some dots and stuff like that, like to actually communicate with the human actor, emoting and all that. It's a very different experience from the actor's perspective, And for us as viewers, I feel like it really captures this kind of heart and this emotion that, like, you just don't have with typical CGI.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm sure it's so much more helpful for an actor to be able to feed up another human being rather than going, okay, there's like a giant dragon there. Just imagine that. These three green ping pong balls, just like you've got to be. It's the most amazing dragon you've ever seen in your life. And you've got to run. I don't know how they do that, but
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think that. So I mean, it is very effective, and I would say one of the most effective thing in this really is and why you feel so sorry for Caesar, I guess, is that he starts off. We have a sort of innate. It's easier for us to feel sorry for an animal than it is a human being, because we know that animals are basically just doing what they do. They have no sort of concept of morality. So you have that as a base, and then not only that, but he's an ape that's been put into a situation where he's very alone. He's been taken out of any kind of natural environment. He then has difficulty re-establishing himself into any kind of natural environment. So the whole time, you see this very sort of tortured guy who just wants to go home and have some sort of semblance of the nice sort of coddled reality he had before, which is only very sort of subtly implied in Conquest. But I still think in a way there is still some elements of looking at what it means to dehumanize someone, because you've got an intelligent creature that's more intelligent than a person of the same age, and yet he then gets sort of locked up in a cage. He's sort of subjected to the kind of the gang sort of mob sort of violent structure of the enclosure with all the other apes, and then trying to sort of justify his own existence and things like this whilst having to go through it. So there are, I think, definitely there's elements of dehumanization. But I mean, the bigger message I would say is like, we shouldn't play God, and we shouldn't sort of test our horrible things on innocent animals, really.
I was going to say that's like was the argument of, James Franco's girlfriend, where she's like saying, shouldn't tamper with nature and stuff, because she's a vet for, I guess, apes and stuff like that. And so she sees like kind of probably different times people trying to make, the apes pets, whatever, and everything. And so she would rather they, kind of just are left to be in nature and stuff like that. But meanwhile, he, because of how he creates this bond with Caesar and stuff, that as again was well-intentioned as he is, it creates this thing of where, on one hand, he introduces Caesar to this world of humans and makes him, like he's sitting there at the table with everybody, like kind of eating and stuff like that, just as another kid. But, like you said, when he gets thrown into the world of the apes, at first he's like kind of drawing that window, and he's like kind of, longing for home. And then, we know that like, he's kind of woken up when like he erases that and basically said, like kind of, like that's when we really see that like he realizes that like he's not going home and stuff, like no matter what, even if he does. And then I think one of the most powerful scenes is that like when James Franco's character goes back to this let's call it this captivity, this I guess it was like a ape kind of detention center, I guess. And
I don't know.
And he like basically kind of is going to pay off the jailkeeper, so to speak, and to bring him home. And Caesar closes the door on him, and it's like kind of that was like one of the most powerful moments, I think, where it's basically like him saying like I'm done with the human way and stuff. Yeah,
I think in a sort of a slightly sort of deeper way, it may be sort of saying as well, in order for this, for him and the other sort of apes to be accepted, they also have to kind of have some sort of rebellion. They've got to kind of establish their own power. So any sort of comforts of the system as it is have to be kind of thrown away in order to sort of make the change that's needed as well. So yeah, although I would say James Franco is rather hypocritical in the movie, in that he's he's there taking the drugs home, testing them on his dad. He's like doing the willy-nilly, and then when the boss comes through and says, okay, I want to do immediate kind of trials on humans, we're going to escalate this, and he's like, don't be ridiculous, these trials need to be contained, what do you know, this is so reckless. And it's like, okay,
right. The pot calling the kettle black.
I know, right? Yeah.
And I think it's worth mentioning that John Lithgow plays, his dad, and I think he kind of really is able to, bring more humanity to the situation and stuff. Where you really, feel like or you're trying to, even though that what James Franco's character is doing is wrong, you kind of are rooting for him to kind of restore his dad, kind of at least, to overcome the Alzheimer's against all odds and stuff.
Yeah, I think that again though bolsters this whole sort of don't play God aspect. Alzheimer's is a natural kind of disease, and we could screw ourselves up by trying to cure it. It's like this. I don't know how true that is, but yeah, I would say that. What's interesting though is that I think the film very cleverly makes you kind of root for James Franco to begin with, and then transitions and makes you root for Caesar towards the end, which is not an easy thing to pull off, actually. I would say, in a movie.
Actually, there's a couple of different Easter eggs and stuff. One is the mother, I guess, of Caesar is called Bright Eyes, and because of how apparently the drug has this effect of creating this kind of brightness in the eyes of the chimps and stuff. And that's actually was Cornelius' nickname for Taylor in the original.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Forgot about that.
And the other thing was, Caesar, before things start going haywire, he's working on this Statue of Liberty model and stuff. So that's an interesting another Easter egg.
Yeah, nice. I didn't spot that. Yeah, I mean, I would say as well, though, just to sort of maybe pick a hole in this, is that it is a bit ridiculous that a gene therapy could sort of radically alter the intelligence of any creature sort of by 2 or 3-fold in a matter of hours. That's...
Right.
Yeah. So, in a way, people, the way that, people in ape suits was a little more realistic in that respect, and how they gauge their apes. But
I tell you though that we really don't see kind of them as kind of people I mean we're kind of just well beyond kind of the people in suits kind of thing because of the whole motion capture effect where the apes look fantastic and stuff. One thing I want to kind of mention also too, along the lines of Easter eggs, is Tom Felton, who's the kid who we love to hate from Harry Potter, and he's hosing down Caesar, just kind of Charlton Heston and hose down stuff like that. And then the one line, get your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape. Again, so he's basically echoing that line. So that's another, like you were saying earlier about, we have to kind of almost have that once in every movie and stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, no, that's quite... Yeah, I'd forgotten that Charlton Heston gets hosed down as well in a similar situation. Yeah, it's a nice sort of reversal they did in that. Yeah, I mean, aside from that, I think it does quite a good job, actually, in terms of a remake, reboot, compared to a lot of others we've watched. It's, pretty decent.
I think it really carried things into, kind of, the new franchise where you felt somewhat invested, even though that it leaves on a hopeful note in one respect, but then again, like a horror movie, it has this kind of mid credit role where basically we see the pilot's kind of infected and and we just kind of see and I'm kind of curious your I know you have a thing about not liking when they do kind of these scrolls to the credits and stuff. So I'm kind of curious what your thoughts about doing a one for mid-credit scene and stuff, because they're telling the story that for the sequels that he's spreading the disease and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's I didn't mind it too much because I mean, again, it's kind of like, oh right, they're setting up another franchise, usual story. Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I actually switched it off before that, so I'd completely forgotten that. Maybe that's actually the best way to do these sort of things. Anything that's a franchise, just turn it off before the credits roll, because so you get annoyed by them trying to set up the next movie. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, also, you know, like I think that we have like kind of you know, just these apes that they're more, you know, human in a lot of respects than you know, like kind of the humans and stuff like that, you know. And I think that's like kind of what they really do well with this, you know, the franchise, you know, like in other words, we kind of went beyond the kind of the humans in suits and stuff, you know, ape suits trying to convince us. And then now we have like these digital kind of creatures that like look more ape-like and everything, but there's this kind of humanity that they're able to convey through, you know, like kind of actors in doing, you know, executing motion capture really well and stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's done really well. Yeah, and just going back, there was one other thing that I thought was kind of funny was when Franklin, I want to say his name's Franklin, the assistant who's there sort of helping out James Franco with his apes. And there's the bit where he's just kind of sneezed blood on a sheet of paper, and his reaction is, "Excuse me a sec." I think my reaction to sneezing blood would be, "Holy crap!" That was just like, well, he certainly keeps calm under pressure.
Yeah, and you know, like, I mean, talk about humans doing it to themselves. It's like, you know, you're a lab technician. You know, you were exposed to stuff. You know, sneezing blood, and you're not like gonna alert anybody. Like, you know, you're pretty much setting up a pandemic. You know, like.
I know. Yeah. But yeah.
So yeah, that was of course, you know, like another episode of our Going Apes series and stuff like that. Coming up, we're going to be doing Mighty Joe Young, and that we promise will be, you know, we'll be done with apes for a little while and stuff.
Not quite sure. Yeah, a month of apes, which I thought was really funny. But yeah, we'll be looking. I'll be definitely looking forward to some non-ape related remakes after that. So.
And then I don't know if, like, you know, maybe instead of Shark Week in the future, we'll have like a monsters month or something like that. So, like, in other words, maybe
we'll just pick one type of monster. We'll have like a Dracula week or a Dracula month or something like this, or a Frankenstein month.
Right. So once again, I'm John Chang with Dan Edmonds. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.